Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝘗𝗀𝗃. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, how about that recent article 𝗫𝘃𝗏 just sent over to us? Non-real estate related. That thing was awesome, though.
Well, it is real estate related in a way, though. So, 𝗫𝘃𝗏𝗵𝗁, episode 28 and episode 70, he texted me and Tom an article from WBEZ. And it was all about when the Eisenhower Expressway was built, 290. So when they built it from the Loop to Elmhurst, and it talked about neighborhood by neighborhood of all how each neighborhood was affected, how neighbors were split, how some crazy things that happened. It was just awesome. It was more like a short ebook. It wasn't even an article. So what do you think? What was your craziest thing you thought in there, or you learned in there, I guess?
I would say two things. So first, I don't because I live so far north, I don't use the Eisenhower that much. So it's kind of eye-opening to me. But when I do use it, in high school, I used to, Austin Avenue was our on and off ramp to get down and go play other schools. And it was when you're on the Eisenhower to get off at Austin, you get on the left. I'm like, this is so stupid and so dangerous. Why does it happen this way? And the article explains why. They had the people protesting on the south end there. So you had to put the exit on the north end. So selfishly, that answered a question I never knew. I think at a more macro level, though, it talks about, this is 70 years ago. And it talks about, the Italians went out to Melrose Park and Elmwood Park, and the Hispanic contingency went to, they ended up in Pilsen, a little village. And 70 years later, here we are. And that, those movements at that time still shape these neighborhoods today. That's crazy.
Yeah, I agree. So Eisenhower was our expressway choice. Growing up, we race and see how fast we get from Addison to the Loop on there, and go to church there on Sunday down there. So it does mean a little more to me. But the craziest fact I saw is we all know right around there between First Avenue and Des Plaines Avenue, you got the cemetery. And when they built it, they had to I don't know what the right word is. They had to dig up 1,800 bodies. Now, the crazier fact of that was, of those 1,800, majority of them were people that were victims of the Spanish flu in the 1920s. So just kind of where we are at times right now with Corona and all that, I found that to be an interesting, ironic type fact.
Yeah. Great article. We'll make sure to, if you're interested in just the history of Chicago, we will make sure to post that in the Facebook group and on the page. Yeah,
for sure. We'll post that the day this launches. So if you're listening to this, you can shoot on over there and you'll see it posted.
Cool. All right. What do we got for housing provider tip of the week?
So we're going to be talking about low-income affordable housing today. So I just wanted to throw this out here, and I've seen it happen recently, especially even on the north side and northwest side. I'm seeing a lot more of these mobility Section 8 CHA tenants. I'm seeing a lot of landlords, questioning, should I have some Section 8 tenants in my place, because I'm afraid market tenants might not pay. But one of the things, and we can refer back to our CHA episode. I don't know if you know the episode number, Tom, but it's the important thing is to be there at the inspection. And you have two sets of inspections for CHA. You have right when the tenant moves in, and then you have the annual inspection. It's important that you or your representative or your property manager is showing up for that to make sure that they kind of control the flow of the inspection, and the tenant's not ranting and raving about this guy get fixed and this got fixed and so forth. So you're kind of there to make sure you control the flow of what's going to happen next, or what the CHA inspector, Section 8 inspector writes down. So tip today, just make sure you're there and you're prepared for these inspections. There's a 2-inch book of HUD guidelines, but there's also probably about a 4-page, and we could post this as well too, of really, these are the things by room that you got to make sure that you account for. And you should almost go over this checklist in advance of your inspections to make sure you're prepared and stand a chance to pass on the first time. So, Tom, we'll reference actually in the show notes if you don't know offhand, but what episode is kind of the tips for CHA inspection?
No, it's episode 53.
Oh, okay, all right, good. See, I knew you wouldn't let me down.
All right. Today's episode is going to be a good one. We have a niche that we have not covered in great detail, Mark. So before introducing our guest, just a quick shout out to a publicist, Sabrina Wattring. Sabrina has brought us this guest, also brought us our recent episode with Sal and with 𝗫𝘃𝗏𝗵𝗁. But yeah, today's guest, a broker with a really cool niche. He formed affordable housing investment brokerage after identifying a need for a dedicated brokerage for affordable housing. The company has been around for over 8 years, closed on over 100 of these properties. And prior to formulating this company, he participated in a brokerage here locally in Chicago, closing over 97 transactions with a total market value over $700 million. So he's been around the block before starting his own company here. earned his degree in Bloomington and Indiana University, and then came over to the correct side of the state line. So without further ado, Kyle Shoemaker, welcome to the show. Kyle, how are we doing today?
I'm great, Tom. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so this will be good. So first off, before we're talking about this niche of specifically focusing on affordable housing, just give us the 2-minute rundown. You came to Chicago, you started working at 𝗦𝘃𝗶𝗵𝘁. How did you get into real estate? Just give us that appropriate context before we dive into the current company.
Sure. Well, I was studying finance in college. I wanted to get into some type of career where you had virtually unlimited earning potential and were doing deals and interacting with people, and ended up learning about commercial real estate services. And I just love the idea of applying finance and deal making to something physical. So I just became determined to figure out how to become a commercial real estate broker, and went out looking for places where somebody new could get into the field. I got hired on by a team here in Chicago that did multifamily brokerage throughout the Midwest, and that's how it started.
Awesome. All right, so we're doing deals. We're having some success, right? We end up doing over $700 million in volume. Like, that's a big number. So, how did we end up in affordable housing? Like, what was the turning point where it's like, you know what, this is all great, but I'm going to focus specifically on this?
Well, that number was really the team I was a part of. Okay, so that wasn't completely me individually. I was still really young and trying to forge a path to find my own area of expertise to be able to add value to high-level clients when I was 24, 25 years old, and find something that would be able to produce deal volume for me to be actually producing. Okay, so that's where it started, was really trying to find a business niche. The team I was with touched on affordable housing. Okay, it wasn't a focus, but I had a little bit of exposure to it, and I became fascinated by the product. Okay, just the concept of a entrepreneur, real estate investor, developer being able to partner with the government to ultimately create something that is truly a vital social need and make a lot of money doing it was fascinating to me. And I recognized it was difficult and that not a lot of people understood it. And so I just grasped on to learning the nuances over the 9 years I was with 𝗦𝘃𝗶𝗵𝘁 there.
So let's start with identifying what is affordable housing. The term gets thrown around a lot. We recently had 𝗖𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀 Young on the episode and touched on this, but what is that definition so we can dive in a little deeper?
Sure. In my definition for my business, the simplest way to put it is a property that is either a party to a project-based rent subsidy contract. Okay, so a Section 8 contract that stays with the building, not tenant vouchers, or a property that was built or renovated under the Section 42 low-income housing tax credit program. Okay, that's the two largest spaces, but really where my work comes in is any property that is going to have some type of deed restriction that limits affordability and therefore makes it a much more specialized investment than buying a normal conventional market rate property.
So most of our listeners are familiar with the voucher program, and the voucher program is a totally different than what we're talking about today. But project-based, I know anyone that is looking that has Section 8 tenants now or looking at some bigger buildings, they come across these project-based buildings every so often. Give us an idea, and you give me a roundabout. In the Chicago market, how many like project-based type buildings are there? Is there like 10? Is there thousands? Is there maybe 300 or 400? I know I'm not holding it to a number, just kind of an idea so people know what type of opportunities out there.
I think several hundred.
Okay. Several hundred. And those buildings, basically, you have a contract with HUD. And give us a little idea. You tell me. So if I own a project-based building, what does that kind of look like as far as maybe compared to the voucher program? Maybe if you don't mind comparing that.
Sure. Well, I'll briefly mention the most of them are through HUD. There are some project-based rent subsidy contracts that the CHA, for instance, has assigned to various buildings, but in the world I'm talking about, the couple hundred properties, it's a contract with HUD. Okay, and this is how HUD used to handle the Section 8 rent subsidy program from, I believe, the late 60s up through the early 1980s. At that point in time, they stopped giving these contracts out. Okay, housing, creation of affordable housing has since moved much more towards a focus on mixed income, as opposed to having one building that is going to have everybody being low income who lives there. So there are not new HAP contracts, is what they're technically referred to. That's Housing Assistance Payment Contract. That's a Section 8 contract with HUD. There are not new HAP contracts. The ones that exist continue to be served. Okay, so the primary difference between a voucher and a HAP contract is that the voucher is only good for the term of that tenant's lease. Okay, you have a tenant on a 1-year lease paying their rent with a voucher. When their lease is up, they can leave, and then there's no subsidy unless another tenant comes along with a voucher. If you have a HAP contract, then as long as you are filling your units with people who meet the low income standard, then HUD is paying a rent subsidy on that unit. Okay, so this becomes very specialized in two ways then. One is that to become a party to a contract with HUD, it's a process. You need to meet a lot of standards to even be able to enter that contract. And the second part of it is that there are going to be different financing vehicles available to purchase or renovate one of these properties. Okay, the low income tax credit being the largest one, but there are a number of other more complicated financing programs that can make the economics work really well on these deals when you know how to do them.
So let me reiterate what you said there. So there's like you said, there's a couple hundred, 200-300 in here in Chicago, and they're not creating a new program or they're not adding new buildings to this inventory because the focus on maybe building new and having mixed and so forth. So the inventory is actually even limited. So did I hear you right on that?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. That's great. That's awesome. That makes it more in demand. Now your risk always, so how long do these contracts typically last for? Because I guess when I hear they're limited and they're trying to gear towards mixed use, that it's like, I'd be afraid to buy one of these because I might lose the contract. Like how long do they typically how long is a typical HAP contract for in these buildings?
The term of most contracts now is 20 years. There can be shorter term contracts. And honestly, I used to hear that concern frequently when I first started in this. But as more investors have been drawn to the space and it's become more competitive, people understand it more. I really don't believe there's risk of the program going away. That I don't think you would be in a situation where your contract's up for renewal and all of a sudden HUD pulls the plug on. Okay, because you have to think about this really practically and understand the people who are covered by these contracts. Okay, so while there's only a couple hundred in Chicago, they're all over the country. The largest population of tenants in Section 8 housing is senior citizens. Okay, if you're over 55 years old and on a fixed income, most people in that position would qualify to live in a HAP contract senior property. A lot of them are nice properties. So even with the government being unpredictable and budget fighting going on constantly, the concept of pulling away this program and suddenly putting possibly millions, I'm not sure the exact number, but possibly millions of seniors on the street is just unfathomable. And so most people don't see it as a risk that the contract won't be renewed, that the program will continue.
So even on a smaller scale, I mean, 20 senior citizens or just 20 low-income residents being displaced is horrible headlines, I imagine, for whether it be the government or localized CHA. So I could see where you could put people's concerns to rest with that. What about and Tom? Hopefully, you this is along the lines of this agenda here because I know I'm skipping ahead. But talk to me about the contract. Like, have you seen landlords like lose a contract because they messed something up? Like, what are like? Is it just like if they don't keep up the building? Like, I imagine there's got to be these standards and inspections that as a owner of one of these buildings you have to uphold.
Absolutely, there are physical inspections that occur every 1 to 3 years, depending on how you score. Okay, that can be pretty arduous when, in terms of the level of detail and things that you need to fix. And at the beginning of the show, when you were talking about prepping a unit for a CHA voucher inspection, it made me think of this, where there are people who have a full business of doing pre-inspections for these HUD inspections, which are called REAC. And so you have those if you have a HAP contract or if you have HUD financing. There are inspections of your files, tenant files. A part of leasing these buildings is going through a income verification process with the tenants to document where their income is, that they're eligible to live there, and your files will be checked on that. So there are a number of standards you have to abide by. And yeah, there have been plenty of people who have gotten in trouble and had contracts pulled away. Usually when somebody gets into that much trouble, though, HUD's trying to work to get someone else in. Okay, because this is the limited resource of the contracts existing, but new ones not being issued. HUD's really going to fight to try and get a better steward in to an asset that's in trouble before they would actually pull the contract.
Yep, that makes complete sense. So, Kyle, you referenced Section 42. I don't think we've talked about it on the show. If you could please just define that. How is it different than Section 8? And is that an opportunity where they actually are, like, you can make a building qualify for that? Is that an actual opportunity to expand, these several hundred that you mentioned, or is that a set number as well?
It is not a set number. Okay. Section 42 is a phenomenal tool to create affordable housing. It's the best creation tool that currently exists. And if I could give any message to your listeners who are listening to all of this government interference and saying, I never want that in my business, I would still encourage you to publicly support this program. I've been a part of lobbying efforts to help educate lawmakers and broaden the scope of the program. My argument to conventional multifamily investors is that the more affordable housing we can create through this program that exists, the less likely we are to face things like rent control that are going to mess with your investments as we try to figure out ways to fight the crisis of a lack of affordable housing, which it truly is.
Yep.
So Section 40.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's get the definition out there, because a lot of people are probably like, oh, this is great, but what is it?
Yeah. All right. So Section 42 is a IRS program. Okay. That's hence the name of the tax credit. It's actually a tax credit that, the way I compare it to a Section 8 contract is that Section 8 is a subsidy to the tenant to pay their rent. Section 42 is really a subsidy to a developer to be able to renovate or build something new if they agree that they will only lease to people at a certain income and that they will have a cap on the rent they can charge, okay, keeping the housing affordable, but the tenants actually pay their rent. And so the basics of the program are: you have your project to build or renovate, you apply and get an allocation of low-income housing tax credits. This is via Section 42. You go and find a partner is usually a bank or a syndication firm with a number of banks who will make a large equity investment into your project primarily for the benefit of receiving these tax credits, which are exactly what they sound like. They'll offset the bank's tax liability dollar per dollar. They meet the Community Reinvestment Act requirement that banks are under. And the developer then uses that money as the equity portion of the project.
So when we are looking at properties and we see the phrase tax credit building, that's what it's referencing, the Section 42.
Correct. Which, if you see one property on the market that references a tax credit property, the vast majority of the time there are no longer tax credits involved. The tax credits are delivered over a 10-year period. And it's really rare that somebody would try to sell one of these assets during that period. After that, though, they frequently sell. And while there are no more tax credits, the property is still required to follow the restrictions that were agreed to for, usually it's a total of 30 years plus. So you're usually looking at properties that are selling, you're 11 to 16 years, say, after they entered the program, and you still have another 15 years left where you're restricted, though there's no longer actual tax credits involved.
Gotcha. I recently sold a lot also to somebody that built a building like that, and it was focused with senior people in West Chicago. So their due diligence period was a long time to get the approval and get the funding. It was a lot we couldn't sell to anyone else, so we had nothing but time on our side. So okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Real quick, sorry to interject, Kyle. Is this something you can do on like a 10 unit? Like, or is there does it need to be on bigger buildings, or can this economically make sense on something smaller?
It's difficult on smaller properties. Well, I guess the two ways to look at your question. Okay. In terms of my business as a broker, frequently something as small as 10 units is going to be more of a local market and I might not be best suited to sell it. Okay. In terms of developing or using the product, that kind of varies by state, but you can get allocations to build something as small as 10 units. Sure. On an acquisition, it probably wouldn't be large enough to have it make economic sense to go through this process. But for new construction, I think that there are smaller projects. Sure.
Yeah. 35 units was the one that the guy built that I sold the lot to.
All right. So this all sounds great, right? Like, we're especially coming through COVID where, subsidized rents and have really, they've been effective, right? Like when there's uncertainty in the market, there's a bigger value put on these. So a lot of our listeners are probably sitting here saying, this is great. Like, how do I get involved? How do I do more? Before doing that though, what are some of the gotchas? Like, you mentioned the inspection, but what are some of you see someone new come into this niche and be like, oh, this guy's going to get crushed here. He or she does not know what they're doing.
Honestly, the big challenge for somebody in that position would be to get into it in the first place. Okay. Because the Section 8 contracts, because the HAP contracts are limited, when one sells, it's generally very competitive. People who are in the business frequently focus entirely on the business. And so when I get hired to sell something with a HAP contract, I will generally have multiple offers to purchase a property from people who are seasoned professionals in the space. And so it's really difficult for somebody who's never done it before to be in position to be competitive. In terms of structuring tax credit deals, those are phenomenally complicated. And to get the partner on board, you need a large balance sheet and a track record. So I generally don't think there's a good path to someone getting into the world of tax credit development unless they're partnering and working with someone who's done it before. I have sold Section 8 contract properties to investors who had not done it before. That's certainly something that can happen. If you've got a relatively sophisticated multifamily management and investment, I believe it's something you can do. And so when you get the opportunity to purchase one, I always recommend hiring somebody who can help you with that application process. I do have 2 deals going on right now. Okay. One in Western Illinois that is smaller and in smaller towns. So it's harder to find an experienced buyer. And I'm working with somebody new who had never done it before. It's a purchase. They're getting ready to close tomorrow, actually. And I said, listen, you really should hire this consultant who used to work for HUD to see you through this process of applying for the assumption of the contract. It costs some extra money and it takes extra time, but they did that and they've been successful now.
So a red flag right away for me, if I saw a property for sale, is like, well, this is pretty lucrative. Why would somebody be selling it? Like, to me, that would be kind of the first thought. Like, what are reasons people would actually sell these? I mean, maybe someone passed away, or like, who would want to sell these? I guess it'd be a big red flag for me.
I don't know that it's too different than other drivers of people selling real estate, where whether it's the time of your investment cycle. Maybe you've owned it 15 years and you're at a different part of your career. So your own decision-making around your personal life and business can be a driver. Then you get opportunity sellers. Maybe somebody bought something off market and they knew how to renew the contract in a way that the rents went way up and they could make a quick profit. Can do that. You may have people who have bought a problem where maybe they went to a new market and felt like they'd be able to manage just as well in the new market than they could in the old market, realized it wasn't the case, so they sell to move on. You see all of those.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Nuances of management. So obviously there's a threshold to getting in. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of approval process. So on the project-based stuff, what's different on the ongoing management over the years?
Well, with the caveat that I've never managed them myself, as I understand, the paperwork is different in terms of having a very specific set of guidelines for what your lease needs to look like and what supporting documentation there needs to be from the tenant to enter that lease, and updating it occasionally. That all is more involved and has a more specific way of doing it than just a normal apartment lease. There is the physical inspections that you have to know how to respond to. Okay, after you have the inspection and certain parts of the structure might be cited to be repaired, there's a process of responding. You have to understand how to renew your contract when that contract is up for renewal and what the best path to doing that might be. And beyond all that, it's a tenant base that is generally going to be a little different than at a market property. And if you're talking family assets, okay, so not senior, but where anybody can live, there can be trouble, like any apartment complex where 50 or 100 people live. The number one tenant in family Section 8 housing is a single mother. And in my experience of just chatting with people, and so not specifically quantified, but I usually hear property managers saying, maybe 60 or 70% of the people here are working and trying to make a good home and they're good tenants. And then I have 15 or 20% who seem like freeloaders. And then there's a small percentage where we might get real problems. And that's, if you're in a tough neighborhood, that can be very management intensive to deal with.
Gotcha. So as far as the leasing goes, so you have a 50 unit building and it's on project base and a tenant moves out. Is it traditional where an owner will just put it up on Zillow or Trulia, or is there a project-based list that they choose from, or is there even a waiting list for buildings like this?
Usually there are waiting lists.
So marketing is different then totally on this.
Yeah, that's great.
If
a waiting list for your product.
When I'm marketing these properties to people who are pros in the business, they don't say, is there a waiting list? They say, how long is the waiting list? And if I ever answered that there wasn't one, that would be a huge red flag that either there was some kind of problem, right? Either there's a major problem with the asset itself or the people managing it, if there isn't a waiting list, which, okay, that's great from the investor perspective, but that's another nugget of information here that just demonstrates why affordable housing is a crisis level situation. Okay? There is not nearly the supply that society needs.
Well, let's put on our economics hat here. What else can be done then, right? Like, why aren't there more of these contracts?
Well, I think the contracts were moved away from largely to try and support mixed income development, which most people involved would agree are better than having a single property that is going to be exclusively low income. I think that's the simplest way to say why HUD moved away from them. Now, what people can do, honestly, the best thing I think anybody listening to this can do is to support the low-income housing tax credit. And you can do that by, if you have the opportunity to ever speak with a lawmaker, to tell them that you think it's a good thing for your business and your community. There are really great industry organizations. In Illinois, there is a group called the Illinois Housing Council, which I would really encourage any multifamily landlord to join. And just by joining that, you're supporting their work as lobbyists and advocates trying to grow this program. And the program has bipartisan support. Okay, one of the few things we can point to on a government level where Democrats and Republicans historically are on board for this. It creates housing. It's a proven job creator. It is truly an investment program. And that's our best tool we have right now to create more. There's a lot of momentum to grow the program currently. And the more people involved in real estate investment have a base level understanding that it's a good thing and can offer their support, I think the better it will be.
Okay, cool. Awesome. How many states are you doing brokerage in for this? And then anything you could share, good or bad, that Chicago might be different than some of these different markets when it comes to some of these project-based type buildings?
Sure. My firm, I think we've closed in 23 states now.
Oh, wow.
It's the programs here are so specialized that you're better off having a buyer who understands the program rather than the real estate. Okay. And because there's such a limited supply, it becomes a national marketplace very quickly for the people buying them. If I'm selling a 20 or 30 unit building, that's small enough that it's more localized. But if it's 50 units plus, anywhere in Chicagoland, that becomes a national marketplace. I, several years ago, sold a 65 unit, I believe, property in Rogers Park. And it was a senior building with a project-based Section 8 contract, a HAP contract. And I think I had 15 offers with 6 or 7 of them being local people and the others being from different parts of the country. The challenges of Chicago, and I don't know that it's that different in my industry than in broader real estate investing, where some people will be skittish about the state of affairs in Illinois. They'll be worried about real estate taxes. Be worried about crime, depending on what neighborhood you're in. Things that aren't dramatically different than other real estate investment, but I support it as a world-class city and still get attention from all over the country when I get to work on a deal here.
A question, just out of curiosity, you drive around the city, you see, in suburbs even too, you see buildings managed by, or maybe even owned by 𝗬𝘂 Housing or Lakeside Management. Are those project-based buildings, or anything you could share on that? Just kind of curious, if anything.
Some are. Okay. 𝗬𝘂 Housing, you mentioned, is a large national nonprofit real estate owner and developer. And so they have Section 8 contracts in their portfolio, but they have other properties too. I know that they have some property that is only tax credit restricted. And they, I believe, might even touch on stuff that is naturally occurring affordable or workforce. So just conventional multifamily that doesn't have a deed restriction. So I'd say it'd be hard to say just looking from the street when you're driving around, okay, particularly with tax credit housing now, because a lot of tax credit housing doesn't really look different than other apartments. This is a kind of a barroom conversation I have all the time where people ask about what I do. And I start by saying, well, they ask about housing projects, right? I say, well, a housing project to start with, that's owned by the government. Okay. I work in a space where entrepreneurs partner with the government. And here's all the different ways this can work and what the properties can look like. And the untrained eye is generally not going to be able to identify them just on a quick drive-by.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Is there any other, like when you're selling that Rogers Park building and you're doing the the listing pro forma, is there any major differences compared to a traditional pro forma? Like, are there other things you need to account for in there or adjust, or is it pretty in line?
I'd say it's very different than a pro forma on a conventional multifamily property. Okay, because if you're subject to a project-based Section 8 contract, your rents are ultimately being determined by HUD. Okay, where a normal apartment investor can look at a building and say the rents are $100 lower than they are down the block, and I think with minor upgrades I can do that. No, you can just do that. It's not that simple if your rents are determined by HUD. Okay, so there is a process to potentially being able to increase rents on a contract, particularly if you're going to be improving the property, particularly if there's upward rental momentum in the conventional market in the neighborhood. But understanding what's possible, how to get there, is much more nuanced than on a normal apartment property. Beyond that, you likely have to have a little bit heavier expense underwriting with the expectation of the paperwork we've talked about from the administrative standpoint, being able to quickly meet the needs you might have after a physical inspection, things like that. But I'd say the revenue is probably what's most nuanced.
Got it. That makes sense. A lot of good stuff here. All right. So Kyle, last question before we wrap. Where do you see affordable housing going in the US in the next 5-10 years? Like, I know there's a shortage, there's a crisis, as you mentioned. Are we on the right trajectory? Like, do you feel like we're going in the right direction? Or do you feel like, hey, we're still stagnant and a lot of radical changes need to be made?
Are we better than climate change or worse than climate change?
Oh, wow. I'm not qualified for that one, but, Tom, some combination of the two. Okay. We have a long way to go. I believe that income inequality is something that doesn't have a quick fix and appears to be a scenario that's only going to get worse. Okay, which means we have a long way to go in terms of meeting housing needs. Okay, that's the pessimistic side of this conversation. But where I have a lot of optimism is in what the tax credit program has done and the growing support I've witnessed for it in my time in this business, which is nearly 20 years now. Just an awareness of the program has grown. With the awareness almost always comes support. Right now there is momentum behind the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which is a bill in Congress at the moment that would expand the program. I know there's housing initiatives in the infrastructure bill. And while we certainly have a difficult political climate, particularly when it comes to spending, I can't stress enough that this is a program with major Republican support. That's a proven job creator, a proven investment vehicle. So to the extent that anybody listening wants to be trying to invest in these products, I'd look for a mentor or a partner. To the extent that people just want the government to stay out of their own business, the best way you can do that is to support the people who are already in this, to support the programs that are trying to address the problem, to limit chances that you might face something like rent control as this problem becomes larger. Join the Illinois Housing Council. Okay, that's the best commercial I can give to real estate investors who are interested in supporting the work.
Dig it.
All right, great. Let's move to our wrap up. You ready, Kyle?
Absolutely.
All right, 20 years in the business here. How have you been able to do what you've been able to do? What's your competitive advantage?
Persistence at borders insanity. Honestly,
that's a good broker right there.
I think finding a niche is critical. When I think it's very, very difficult in commercial real estate services to be a generalist. I think it's key to find some type of niche that you can hang your flag on and spend all your energy on, and then stay persistent with it no matter what.
Agree on that.
That's awesome. I'm going to change this question a little bit, but what is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is looking to get into the affordable housing game?
Find a mentor or a partner, at least in terms of how we have defined affordable housing from my business. I think that any landlord can maybe adjust the way they see a particular investment, and where you're frequently going to be focused on pushing rents as high as you can, maybe improving a property to be in a higher level rent. Think about investments that might not make sense to spend a lot improving them, and where you can still make a good return and serve a lower income client base without subsidy.
Nice. All right. What do you do for fun?
Well, I'm a regular reader. I'm attempting to be a golfer. I have 2 young children who are grade school age. And so I spend a lot of time driving to soccer games and dance practices. And it's wonderful. I have a lot of fun with all that.
Nice. All right. You mentioned you're a reader. What is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, you guys set me up for this one when you were talking about this article, which I'd love to read at the beginning of the show, about the construction of the Dan Ryan, or not the Dan Ryan, I'm sorry, it was the Eisenhower. Right?
Yes.
And the history of Chicago and touching on neighborhoods. There is an excellent podcast called 𝗬𝘃𝗏, which is produced by USA Today. And the first season of 𝗬𝘃𝗏, I believe there's only 2 seasons. They were both excellent. The first season looked at it started with a story of an illegal dump site in Chicago. And they really modeled this after the Wire television series, which I'm also a huge fan of, to say, we're not just focusing on this illegal dump site. We're going to look at the 30 different layers of how this came to be and all the different places, parts of a city and a community that touch on this, and unravel the whole thing. It is an outstanding real estate story, an outstanding Chicago history story, and really can be an eye-opener as to the impact of what we're all involved in.
Oh, I have an hour drive after this podcast, or after this, we record this, so I'm excited.
I don't, but I'm going to cancel my calls and take an hour drive. This is happening. If anyone ever wants to get my attention, just start talking about The Wire for about 5 minutes.
I see your eyes light up. It's hilarious. Yeah. All right, Kyle, besides yourself, name one person in your local network that you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Applegate and Thorne Thompson is the go-to law firm in Illinois for affordable housing work.
Okay. Perfect.
Nice. We'll link to them in the show notes. Kyle, thank you so much. This has been new information we haven't covered yet. It's been very valuable to our listeners. How can our listeners learn more about you, and is there any way they can provide value to you?
Well, to learn about me, I mean, my company has a website where we keep a deal blog that gives some very basic info about everything we close. I'm always interested to meet new people and network and see how we might be able to help each other out. I'm a very open person, particularly if somebody's looking to learn. And I recognize that I can learn from anybody I meet, no matter what their stage of career. So, yeah.
Awesome. We'll put your home address on the bottom in the show notes. I'm joking.
What school your kids go to? All right. So, Mark, I was fumbling to find the CHA episode because I changed our Chicago fact to match with the banter that I was unaware of. So, okay. I had a question. I had to switch it out. So we've touched on 290 a few times now, but how many miles is the Eisenhower? And you'll have your multiple choice. So just get in the right order of magnitude. So running east to west, is it 8.6 miles, 13.5, 20.3, or 29.8?
20.3.
Kyle, you want to throw one out there?
I'm going to go with the 13.
Nah, guys, it's bigger than you think. 29.8 miles.
Really?
Wikipedia says so.
All right, well, I don't know where it ends. Does it end? It goes all the way up to I don't know. It gets all weird around Addison, Itasca there.
So yeah, you know what though? Like I think it officially goes all the way up to like 90. I think they count that as like that turn up, like to like Hoffman Estates. I think
perfect. 20.3 goes Addison. I'm in.
That's what threw me off. I was thinking it ended where it should turn.
It originally ended, what I learned from the episode too, it originally ended in Elmhurst right there. So I didn't know that fact either. So awesome show, Kyle. Awesome knowledge topic we haven't had on here. Tom, always a great show. Listeners, we're going to post the Eisenhower article here today on the podcast Facebook group. And then, we will, Ryan shared us that article. So if you guys ever have interesting Chicago articles out there or Illinois stories, we love that stuff. So share it on here and we'll talk about it and share it with everybody. So have a good week, guys, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks all.